On August 10, 2015, Google's founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin announced that they would be stepping away from Google's day-to-day operations. At the time, it seemed like the two were simply stepping back to focus on philanthropy, humanitarian issues, and other companies. You know, the regular tech billionaire stuff. But since they stepped down, both of them basically fell off the face of the planet. We've only seen a handful of public appearances, if that, and it's almost as if Sundar Pichai was Google's founder. After all, Sundar is just as popular as Larry Page and twice as popular as Sergey Brin according to Google Trends. So what happened to Google's founders and where are they today? Well, starting off, if we take a look at Sergey Brin and Larry Page's history at Google, we'll see that they never really chased the spotlight. Going back to 1998, Larry Page was originally the CEO of Google when the company was started, but it was clear that neither Larry Page nor Sergey Brin were particularly great executives. In 2001, for instance, Larry wanted to fire all of the project managers at Google. He believed that engineers should be left to their own devices to produce the best results, and that pressure from management simply stifled their work. So he thought that removing management altogether was a great idea. While that might work in an ideal world, this was obviously not a realistic decision, especially for a startup which needed to be precise, accurate, and focused. After receiving a lot of backlash for this idea though, Larry understood his shortcomings when it came to running a business and gave up his position as CEO. It wasn't some crazy falling out like we so often see though. Larry did not leave the company like Steve Jobs or Jack Dorsey. Larry actually became really good friends with the new CEO, Eric Schmidt. In fact, I would even argue that Larry is better friends with Eric today than his co-founder Sergey. Eric served as CEO for a full 10 years, until he himself stepped back stating that day-to-day adult supervision is no longer needed. Larry would become CEO once again in 2011. This did not last long as he would step back in 2015. The reason I bring up this story is to showcase that during Larry and Sergey's active involvement with Google, Larry was CEO for less than half the time and Sergey was never CEO. This is in stark contrast to basically every other company founder who loves to have maximum control and be at the center of attention. I mean, given that they founded the company, I don't blame them. But this was clearly not the case with Google's founders. They never chased the spotlight while they were at Google, so it makes sense that they didn't chase the spotlight after leaving Google either. Aside from being happy with working in the background, both Sergey Brin and Larry Page are extremely private people. Neither of them really have any social media presence. They don't have publicly known Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube accounts. Sergey Brin even suggested that him working on Google Plus was probably a mistake because he's not a very social person. So we won't be seeing random Dogecoin pumps because of a tweet from Sergey. But their efforts for privacy stretch way further than simply avoiding social media. For instance, we don't even know who Larry's kids are. We know he had a son in 2009, but we don't know his name and we've never even seen a picture of him. In 2011, Larry revealed that he had another child, but we don't even know the gender of this child. It's honestly quite impressive that Larry has been able to hide this information from the press for so long. At the same time though, I bet a lot of you guys think that this is quite ironic, given that Google is infamous for invading users' privacy. But honestly, I don't think Larry nor Sergey really wanted Google to go in that direction in the first place. And that brings me into my next point, which is that the two lost control of Google. This isn't anything new within the business world. As companies grow larger and larger, shareholders and investors have a more significant say in the future of the company. Usually, the interests of the shareholders and the executives are aligned though. For the most part, the primary goal of executives and shareholders is to simply grow the company's reach as much as possible and maximize profit/shareholder value. This is the same case with Google shareholders, but the problem is that this is not really the founder's goal. During the 2000s, Larry and Sergey bended to the shareholders' wishes, as they agreed that establishing financial stability was a top priority. However, as Google became a dominant player and started pulling in massive profits year after year, Larry and Sergey wanted to focus on something more meaningful. They wanted to focus on experimentation, research, and innovation, instead of just increasing profits year after year after year. In May of 2013, Larry would reveal his long-term vision for Google, and this would make it clear that Larry and the shareholders did not agree whatsoever. Larry wanted to create something called Google Island. As the name suggests, Larry wanted Google to operate as if it was an island. This meant cutting out corporate, shareholder, and government interests. I'm not sure how Larry expected the public to react. Maybe he thought that they would support his goal of focusing on innovation over profits. But the public basically just laughed at him. The press ran several papers suggesting that this was just further evidence that tech billionaires were completely disconnected from reality. And shareholders just wrote off Google Island as some ludicrous nerd fantasy. The fact that the public ridiculed the idea made it evident that neither Larry nor Sergey really had control over Google anymore. Now technically, they still owned 51% of the voting shares, so they could technically do whatever they wanted. But doing something that your shareholders relented would still not be that good of an idea. And this lack of control probably just pushed them to leave the company. Objective issues regarding control and the company's future weren't the only things that plagued the duo's leadership though. Another major factor pushing the two to leave public life was their personal issues. In 2012, Larry Page would be struck by vocal cord paralysis. Larry had actually been dealing with vocal cord issues for the entirety of his life, but the situation became especially bad starting in 2012. His voice would become more and more hoarse and quiet, and Larry would begin avoiding earnings calls, speaking events, conferences, and of course, the media. In the meantime, Sergey would undergo his own PR nightmare. In 2014, it would be revealed that Sergey Brin had been having an affair with a Google employee named Amanda Rosenberg. At the time, he was married to Anne Wojcicki, who you may know as the founder of 23andMe. To make things worse, Anne's sister Susan is the CEO of YouTube. So I would assume the executive meetings at Google were quite awkward after that. Larry Page was also not amused whatsoever about the situation. Larry had been friends with Sergey since college, and he saw Sergey's relationship with Anne grow firsthand. This affair was completely unexpected for Larry, and he basically started shunning Sergey ever since. Larry stopped talking to Sergey, and it doesn't seem like Larry ever forgave Sergey. Fortunately for Sergey, he had a large enough stake in Google that he couldn't be ousted. But I'd imagine that public events were embarrassing to attend, and this was likely a major factor driving Sergey out of the public's view. I think we'd agree that all of the reasons we outlined thus far are valid reasons to avoid the spotlight. But I think the biggest reason Sergey and Larry have shied away from the public is that Google's original vision has been lost. If you haven't noticed yet, Larry and Sergey never aimed to build a massive tech giant. Their vision was always to build a research company that was run by engineers. Just think about the projects that these two were most excited about. One of the projects that Larry was most excited about was Google's self-driving car project. Similarly, one of the projects that Sergey was most excited about was Google Glass. Though both of these projects have more or less just been massive money pits, it seems like their passion has always lied in Google's moonshot factory. For them, it's never been about maximizing revenue from ads or dominating various sectors of the market. But as we touched on, that's what Google has turned into. Google is more bureaucratic, profit-hungry, and monopolistic than ever before. Google used to consistently rank as the top place to work year after year. But at the end of 2019, Google actually dropped out of the top 10 places to work. Now, I still personally think that Google's overall impact on the world is overwhelmingly positive. But Google is by no means perfect. Google's original motto was, "Don't be evil." And I'm not sure if Larry and Sergey still believe that that's still completely true with Google. The duo have avoided answering questions about Google's stance in regards to privacy, monopolies, and Google's various questionable decisions. If they come out of their shell, however, it's just a matter of time until a reporter asks them about their thoughts on Google's business practices. They've never been interested in that side of the business, and likely prefer that Sundar Pichai and the other executives deal with that instead. But that still leaves the question, what have Larry and Sergey been up to since they left Google? Well, Larry has been able to focus his time on flying cars. Over the past couple of years, he invested into multiple flying car companies, and he seems pretty optimistic about the future of flying taxis. Reports also suggest that Larry has been spending large amounts of time on his private Caribbean island. As for Sergey, we really don't know much about what he's been up to. In January of 2017, Sergey made a surprise appearance at a protest against Trump's immigration order at the San Francisco airport. And there are reports suggesting that Sergey is working on some sort of sky yacht for $100 million. But that's pretty much it for Sergey. The two still hold 51% of the voting shares of Alphabet though. So they could technically return to the company and change its direction if they wanted. Now of course, they can't implement something as crazy as Google Island. But they could definitely revise Google's stance on privacy or its workplace environment. However, the two just sold $1 billion worth of stock, which was their first stock sale since 2017. So, it seems like the two are going to just let Google do its own thing for the best or the worst. Do you guys think Sergey and Larry will come back to Google just like Steve Jobs or Michael Dell? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you're grateful that they founded Google. And of course, consider joining our Discord community to suggest future video ideas, and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.